Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at a really unique watch brand that I recently came across. It's called Nalla Neram.
Okay, yeah, I've seen this brand, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And for this deep dive, we've got some excerpts from a review article, and the title is really intriguing. It's called Nalla Neram Kaalam Minutes Timer, Swiss watch with Indian soul. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how they've managed to blend Swiss watchmaking with this Indian influence.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like a really cool example of globalization done right, taking the best of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of worlds, the founder of this brand, Raman, has a pretty interesting story himself. He actually spent years working for like big multinational companies.
Oh, wow. So a total career change.
Yeah, pretty much he was a watch enthusiast and decided to just take the leap and follow his passion.
I feel like we're seeing that a lot more these days, people breaking away from the corporate world to pursue something they really love. And especially in the watch world, there's like this whole wave of independent brands popping up.
That's true. It's kind of like a rebellion against the big established brands. People are looking for something different, something unique. And when I saw pictures of this Nalla Neram watch, I was struck by the design. It's definitely got a look of its own.
Yeah, it's got a really interesting architectural style to the case. It's stainless steel, 39 millimeters, and has this rounded bezel and these kind of cool shrouded lugs with a tiny Swiss cross detail.
Oh, I like those little details, the ones that you don't really notice at first, but then they catch your eye.
Exactly. And then there are these bead polished ridges along the sides of the case.
So it's got a nice texture to it.
Yeah, it gives it a really tactile, almost industrial feel. But then at the same time, it has sapphire crystals on both sides of the watch.
Oh, wow. So you can see the movement.
Yeah. And that's a pretty big deal, especially for a chronograph, because those box sapphire crystals, as they're called, not only let you admire the movement, but they also help keep the watch slimmer, which is important because chronographs tend to be a bit on the thicker side.
Right, right. That makes sense. And speaking of the movement, and we'll get into the specifics later, but just looking at the dial, it's not your typical layout, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, you have your two chronograph counters with their concentric patterns, which are pretty standard. But then instead of a regular seconds hand, they've got a rotating chakra wheel.
A chakra wheel. Hold on. I need to hear more about this.
Right. It's a really cool design choice because the constantly spinning chakra symbolizes the endless flow of time, which I think ties in really nicely with the whole philosophy of the watch.
And speaking of philosophy, the name itself, Nalla Neram, that actually means auspicious time in Tamil, right?
That's right. Yeah, it speaks to the founder's vision of creating watches that are more than just timekeepers. They're meant to help people value and appreciate their time. And I think that's a really powerful message, especially in a world where we're so often distracted and rushed.
Yeah, for sure. And I noticed there are these orange markings on the outer rings of the dial. What's the story behind those?
Well, those are kind of cool. They actually point to every third minute. And it's a nod to the old trunk calls in India where you only have 3 minutes to talk long distance.
Wow, I love that. It's like a little piece of history embedded in the watch.
Yeah, exactly. It adds a layer of personal storytelling to the design, which I think is really cool.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the heart of this. Watch the movement. It's a La Joux Perret L112 caliber. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but for those of us who aren't watchmakers, what makes this movement so special?
Well, it's based on the Valjoux 7750, which is known for its reliability. It's a workhorse movement, but the L112 takes it up a notch. It uses what's called a column wheel to control the chronograph functions, which gives it a much smoother, more precise feel than a standard system.
Okay, so it's like the difference between driving a stick shift versus an automatic.
Yeah, kind of like that. And then on top of that, it boasts a 60-hour power reserve, so you can take it off for a couple of days, and it'll still be ticking when you pick it back up.
60 hours. Wow. That's impressive. But in a world of smartphones and smartwatches that are always on, is a 60-hour power reserve really necessary?
That's a good question. And I think for some people, it might seem like overkill, but for true watch enthusiasts, it's a testament to the craftsmanship and engineering that goes into creating a mechanical movement.
It's like appreciating the art of watchmaking.
Exactly. It's not just about practicality. It's about the beauty and complexity of the
So
mechanism.
it's a statement piece. It's a way of saying, I appreciate the finer things in life.
I like that. Yeah, it's like a subtle nod to those who know, those who understand the intricacies of mechanical watches. And speaking of appreciating the finer things, we haven't even talked about the presentation yet.
Oh, yeah, here it comes in a pretty impressive box.
Yeah, it's not just any box. It's crafted from Japanese Paulownia wood.
I've heard of that wood. It's supposed to be really special, right?
Yeah, it's known for being lightweight, yet durable. and it's traditionally used for making high-quality boxes and chests in Japan.
So it's like they've thought of every detail.
Yeah, and it's not just the box. They've included a whole set of tools and accessories, like a loop and a spring bar tool. It's like they've anticipated every need a watch enthusiast might have.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's clear that a lot of thought went into the entire experience, not just the watch itself. But before we move on, I'm curious to hear your overall impression of this watch. We've talked about the design, the movement, the story behind it. What do you think makes it truly unique?
For me, it's that special blend of Swiss craftsmanship, personal storytelling,
Hmm.
and a design that encourages mindful appreciation of time. It's a watch that sparks conversation,
Yeah.
and that's something special in a world that's often so focused on the fleeting and the superficial.
Yeah, I agree. It's a watch that makes you stop and think, and that's something we could all use a little more of these days.
Absolutely.
It's funny. We live in a world dominated by smartphones and smartwatches, right? Where time is always on display, yet this watch with this rotating shocker and that little nod to 3-minute trunk calls seems to be saying, hey, slow down and actually think about time for a minute.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's like in our attempt to measure and manage time with, ever-increasing precision, we've kind of lost sight of its actual value.
Exactly. So, in that context, what role do you think a traditional mechanical watch like this plays in today's world? I mean, sure, it's a beautiful object, well crafted, but is it more than just a stylish accessory?
Well, I think it can be for some people. A mechanical watch represents a connection to a simpler time, a reminder of the craftsmanship and the ingenuity that goes into creating something with your hands.
I can see that. Yeah, it's like choosing a handwritten letter over a quick email. There's a certain intentionality behind it.
Absolutely. And there's also a kind of ritualistic aspect to it, the
Mm.
act of winding the watch, setting the time, strapping it on your wrist. It's a way of acknowledging and honoring time in a way that just glancing at your phone can't replicate.
That's true. There's a sense of ceremony involved, a conscious decision to engage with time rather than just passively consuming it.
Exactly. And I think that resonates with people, especially in a world that feels so rushed and overwhelming. A mechanical watch can be a grounding force, a reminder to slow down and appreciate the moment.
So shifting gears a bit, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier, the rise of independent watch brands like Nalla Neram. What do you think is driving this trend? Why are so many watchmakers choosing to go it alone instead of joining, the ranks of the big established brands?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. For one,
Mhm.
there's a growing demand among watch enthusiasts for something different, something unique, something that reflects their individual style and values.
It's like they're looking for something that stands out from the crowd.
Exactly. And the big brands, while they offer quality and prestige, they often have a kind of sameness to their designs,
That they're playing it safe, sticking to what they know sells.
Right. And that's where the independent brands come in.
Yeah.
They're not afraid to take risks, to experiment with new materials, to designs, to create watches that are truly one of a kind.
And they're often driven by a real passion for the craft, aren't they? It's not just about churning out products, it's about creating something special.
Absolutely. Many of these independent watchmakers have honed their skills over years, often working for the big brands before deciding to strike out on their own. So they're bringing a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table, but they're also bringing their own unique vision, their own perspective.
So it's like the best of both worlds, the technical expertise of the established brands combined with the creativity and freedom of independent design.
Exactly. And that's a really attractive combination for a lot of watch enthusiasts who are looking for something truly special.
Now, going back to the Nalla Neram Kaalam Minutes Timer specifically, we talked about that impressive 60-hour power reserve. Can you break down why that's such a big deal in terms of the movement itself?
Sure. The power reserve is basically how long a watch can run on a full wind before it needs to be wound again. And 60 hours is quite long, especially for a chronograph, which means it's a very efficient and well-made movement.
So it's not just a flashy number, it's a reflection of the quality and craftsmanship that went into creating the watch.
Exactly. And that attention to detail is evident throughout the entire watch, from the design of the case to the intricate workings of the movement.
We mentioned earlier that this movement, the La Jupere L112, uses a column wheel for the chronograph function. For those who aren't familiar with watchmaking, can you explain what that means and why it matters?
Sure, column wheel is basically a more complex and refined way of controlling the chronograph mechanism compared to a standard system. You can think of it like a series of gears and levers that work together to start, stop, and reset the chronograph.
Hmm.
The result is a smoother, more precise, and more satisfying feel when you use the chronograph.
So it's like the difference between driving a car with a clunky manual transmission versus one with a smooth, seamless automatic.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It's all about the tactile experience, the feeling of precision and control, and for watch enthusiasts, those details really matter.
Speaking of details, I can't get over the fact that this watch has a chakra wheel for a second's hand.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful and unexpected design element.
I know, right? And it's more than just aesthetics. The chakra is a really powerful symbol in Indian culture, representing the constant flow of energy and the interconnectedness of all things.
So it's not just a design choice. It's a statement about the watch's philosophy, its way of viewing time as something dynamic and ever present.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes this watch so compelling. It's not just a timekeeper, it's a conversation starter, a piece of art that invites you to reflect on your own relationship with time.
Well said. And speaking of conversation starters, I have to ask about that presentation box you mentioned. It's crafted from Japanese paulownia wood. What's so special about that type of wood?
Paulownia wood is known for being very lightweight, but also very durable. It's traditionally used in Japan for making really high-quality boxes and chests. So it's a fitting material for a watch that celebrates craftsmanship and heritage.
And what about the tools and accessories that come with it? You mentioned a loop and a spring bar tool. What are those for?
A loupe is basically a small magnifying glass that watch enthusiasts use to inspect the finer details of a watch, like the finishing on the movement or the engravings on the case, and a spring bar tool is used to change the watch straps.
So they've really thought of everything a watch enthusiast might want or need.
It seems that way. They've really gone above and beyond to create a complete ownership experience, which is something you don't always see even with some of the bigger brands.
Thinking about all the elements we've discussed, the design, the movement, the story, the presentation, it's clear that a lot of thought and care went into creating this watch. It's not just a product, it's a statement.
Absolutely. And it's a statement that reflects a growing desire among watch enthusiasts for something more than just a brand name or a status symbol. They're looking for authenticity, craftsmanship, a connection to something meaningful.
Yeah, and it seems like these independent brands like Nalla Neram are filling that void. They're offering something different, something that really speaks to a more discerning audience.
I think you're right. There's definitely a shift happening in the watch industry. It's not just about big names and flashy logos anymore.
Yeah.
People are looking for substance, for stories, for watches that reflect their values.
Like they want to wear their personality on their wrist.
Exactly. And the independent brands are giving them the opportunity to do that. They're offering a level of personalization and customization that you just don't get with the big brands.
We talked a bit about social media earlier, but I think it's worth digging a little deeper into how that's impacted independent watchmakers.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, social media has been huge for them because it's given them a platform to reach a global audience without having to rely on traditional media or, expensive ad campaigns.
It's like they have this direct line to their customers now.
Right. And that allows them to build relationships, to tell their stories, to create a sense of community around their brand, which is something the big brands struggle with.
It's almost like they're inviting people into their world, into their workshop.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really appealing to watch enthusiasts who are, truly passionate about the craft. They want to know the people behind the watches. They want to understand the inspiration and the process.
It makes the watch feel more personal, more meaningful.
Absolutely. And social media has also created this space for watch enthusiasts to connect with each other, to share their knowledge and their passion. It's fostered this real sense of community online.
So it's not just about buying and selling watches, it's about sharing a common interest, a love for this art form.
Exactly. And that's something that the independent brands have been able to tap into really effectively. They're not just selling watches, they're selling an experience, a connection to a community.
They're building a tribe around their brand.
I like that. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that sense of belonging, being part of something special is really powerful.
Now, circling back to the Nalla Neram Kaalam Minutes Timer, we've talked about so many of its unique features, the design, the movement, the chakra wheel that nod to trunk calls. What do you think is the most compelling aspect of this watch? What really makes it stand out for you?
I think for me, it's the way it blends traditional watchmaking with a modern sensibility.
Mhm.
It's a watch that respects the heritage of the craft, but isn't afraid to push boundaries and explore new ideas.
It's bridging the gap between the past and the present.
Exactly. And it does it in a way that's both stylish and meaningful.
Mm.
It's a watch that you can wear with pride, knowing that it represents something more than just a brand name.
It's a statement piece, but it's also a conversation starter. It invites people to ask questions to learn more about the story behind it.
And that's what makes it so special. It's a watch that sparks curiosity, that encourages people to think differently about time and about the things that are truly important to them.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Nalla Neram and the rise of independent watch brands, I want to leave you all with this thought. In a world that's constantly trying to distract us to pull us in a million different directions, maybe it's time we all slow down, take a deep breath, and reconnect with the things that really matter. And maybe a thoughtfully crafted watch can help us do just that.